You know, some stories from the world of espionage are just so wild, they sound like they were ripped straight from a Hollywood script. Today, we're diving into one of the most daring intelligence operations of the entire Cold War, the absolutely audacious plan to steal a top-secret Soviet fighter jet.
And speaking of Hollywood, just take a look at this. Yep, that's Sean Connery, the original James Bond himself, standing right next to the very jet at the heart of our story. The Israelis even painted 007 on its side, which is just a perfect nod to how unbelievable this real-life spy thriller actually was. This wasn't fiction, folks. This was Operation Diamond.
So, what was all the fuss about? Why risk so much for one airplane? Well, it all centered on one of the most feared pieces of military hardware in the sky at the time. We're talking about the Mikoyan-Gurevich MiG-21, codenamed Fishbed by NATO. Back in the 1960s, this thing was the absolute crown jewel of the Soviet arsenal. It was faster, it was lighter, and it could fly higher than pretty much anything the West had. For Israel, who was surrounded by Arab nations flying these exact jets, it was like a ghost they just couldn't catch.
The head of the Israeli Air Force, a guy named Ezer Weissman, he put it bluntly to the chief of the Mossad. He basically said, "Mayor, I want a MiG-21. It wasn't a wish list item. It was a matter of survival. To defeat your enemy, you have to understand your enemy. And to do that, they needed to get inside its cockpit, learn all its secrets, and find its weaknesses."
But trying to get one? Mad. It proved to be incredibly dangerous. The Mossad's first attempts left a literal trail of bodies. Agents were caught and executed in Egypt. Potential defectors who either got cold feet or too greedy were, well, they were silenced permanently. The mission seemed impossible, and the human cost was already staggering. The stakes just could not have been higher. After years of failure and bloodshed, the Mossad realized they were going about this all wrong. They weren't just looking for a plane, they needed the right person to fly it. And eventually they found him, Captain Munir Rudfa. On paper, he was one of Iraq's best pilots, but underneath the uniform, he was a man in conflict, not just with his country, but with himself. So you have to ask, why would a decorated pilot betray his country? Well, for Redfaw, it was a perfect storm of reasons. He was an Assyrian Christian in a military dominated by Muslims, so he was constantly facing discrimination and being passed over for promotions. His own commanders didn't even trust him with enough fuel for long-range flights. But the real breaking point was moral. He was ordered to bomb Kurdish villages, and he saw it for what it was, a disgusting attack on defenseless civilians. He just felt he had no future in Iraq. Of course, morality was paired with a very powerful incentive. The Mossad offered him $1 million. Now, that's a lot of money today, but back then, it was an absolute fortune. On top of that, they promised him citizenship and a brand new life for him and his entire extended family. Now, this quote isn't actually from Redfi, but it tells you everything you need to know about the Mossad's mindset. It comes from another agent they rescued after years in an Iraqi prison. Their core principle was, we never leave our people behind. And that was the exact same promise they made to Redfa, not just for him, but for every single person he loved. So, with their pilot secured, the Mossad now faced its most complex challenge yet. They had to plan a heist that involved stealing a supersonic jet and smuggling an entire family out from right under the nose of Iraqi intelligence. The logistics here were just breathtaking. Redva himself was secretly flown to Israel to rehearse the flight path. His wife and two small kids, they were taken to Paris, told it was just a summer holiday. She had absolutely no idea what was really going on. And when a Mossad agent finally told her the truth, she had a hysterical breakdown and even threatened to go to the Iraqi embassy. Meanwhile, the rest of his family, parents, siblings, the whole group, were gathered for a supposed picnic, then driven to the border and smuggled into Iran with help from Kurdish fighters. I mean, every single piece had to fall perfectly into place. With his family safe, the board was set. All that was left was for Munir Redfa to make the most dangerous flight of his entire life. So on August 16th, Redfa climbed into his MiG-21. He'd cleverly convinced the ground crew, who really didn't like their Russian advisors, to fill his tanks completely to the top. He took off on what everyone thought was a routine training mission, and once he was in the air, that was it. There was no turning back. You can just imagine the scene as Redfa veered off course. Iraqi controllers are screaming at him over the radio, "Turn around, or you will be shot down." He just turned his radio off.
At the same time, the Israeli escort pilot who met him in the air calmly reported back to his base, "Our guest is slowing down. He signals me with his thumb that he wants to land." The tension was finally breaking.
Just 65 minutes after taking off from Iraq, Redfa landed his MiG-21 at Hatzor Air Base in Israel. The impossible mission was a success, and the intelligence payoff, well, it would change the entire balance of power in the Middle East.
And there it was, the prize. For years, this thing had been a terrifying mystery in the sky. Now it was just sitting in an Israeli hangar, ready to be taken apart, studied, and flown by Israel's own test pilots. They put it up in mock dogfights against their own French-made Mirage fighters, and they learned everything. The MiG was, in fact, faster and lighter, but it had huge blind spots. The cockpit visibility was terrible. Its turning radius at low speeds was a major weakness. They developed specific tactics to exploit every single one of those vulnerabilities. And the result of all that intelligence? Get this. On April 7th, 1967, just 10 months later, a massive dogfight broke out over the Golan Heights. The Israeli pilots, using the exact tactics they'd just learned, shot down 6 Syrian MiG-21s. And their losses? 0. Not a single plane lost. The score was 6-0. But wait, the story doesn't even end there. Israel then loaned the MiG, which they had now codenamed 007, to the United States. In a top-secret program called Have Donut, American pilots secretly tested it over Groom Lake, Nevada, which we all now know as Area 51. This intelligence coup was so valuable to the U.S. that it persuaded them to finally sell Israel the F-4 Phantom, a jet they had been very reluctant to provide before this. But for all the strategic victory, we really can't forget the human cost. This quote from a senior Mossad officer reveals the tragic aftermath. Munir Reifa and his family, they never truly adjusted. They lived in constant fear of Iraqi assassins and eventually moved to another country under new identities. That same officer later admitted a whole family was broken. Reifa died of a heart attack in 1998, a man without a country. The intelligence from that one jet undoubtedly saved lives, and it absolutely shaped history. But it was acquired at an immense personal price. And it leaves us with a really difficult question, one that lies right at the heart of all espionage. What secrets are truly worth risking everything for?